everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
We have a large finite set of carriers on our side, which means that without giving you exact numbers, we believe that we have access to almost 10 to 12% of the market share of refrigerated truck drivers in the country. Which means while a traditional broker, mom and pop, will be working with probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 trucking companies who they have a relationship with, we have tens of thousands of those. Which means to the shipper, you will find reliable capacity with Highway Haul on a click of a button, 24/7, 365 days a year. Because we do not work with the 7 and 10 only carriers. We work with the tens of thousands. So we will find a reliable driver for you round the clock. And that's the beauty of this platform that can scale and collapse with the demand.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Syed Aman, founder and CEO of Hwy Haul. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me.
All right, so you go by Aman. You worked at Walmart before your current enterprise in supply chain. I wonder if you could tell us a little about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent about 8 years in Walmart. In fact, I was one of the first founding engineers of WalmartLabs, which was the new age digital wing of the company to, massively disrupt the e-commerce space back in the days. And one of my charters was to lay the foundation of its online grocery platform and help scale it from a few million to a multi-billion-dollar business. Right. So that's where I was introduced to the fresh produce world, and I built some amazing technology and operations processes, etc., and helped scale it to not only nationwide but globally as well.
Now, supply chain is hard, as you very well know. But when we talk about produce and things that need to be refrigerated, it's very difficult. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and then specifically implications to climate change and food waste.
Of course. So when we look under the hood, pretty much how produce is grown and moved across, thousands of miles across the country and internationally, the supply chain underlying that is very manual and outdated, if you will. So produce needs to be handled with care. For example, it is very temperature and humidity sensitive. Once it is harvested, you cannot wait for 8 hours for the trucks to arrive and things like that, because by the time it reaches, it may be rejected by the grocers, the retailers like the Walmarts and Costco's of the world, right? So yes, so the technology and the process that you built around that needs to support that compliance element of exposing it to the ambient temperatures versus keeping it frozen, chilled, or at room temperatures, etc. So all those things, nuances come into play. And interesting fact about this long haul produce transportation is it takes multiple hops from farms to the distributors, to the wholesalers, to the retailers, and any of these combinations whatsoever. So long story short, 1 out of every 10 or 15 loads get rejected, have rejections. If you add up these rejections, Scott, annually, $15 billion of food gets wasted during transit on the trucks. So that is a North Star that actually we are after.
And what we're talking about is very significant, really is. And I think more on a kind of practical sense that all of us can understand is, my recent complaint about Honeycrisp apple these days is that I'm probably eating apples that were stored in refrigeration about a year ago because it's no longer sweet, for instance. When I lived in France, for instance, sometimes you would see produce that was made in, let's say, Monterey or Carmel region in California. And by the time you get to Paris, it's not so fresh anymore, for instance. So it's a real issue. And the fact that 50% of fresh produce life is spent on a truck, and the fact that, to your point, there's so many hops or depots, and every one of those transitions can be not only disjointed, but you can have non-compliant. So for example, let's say shrimp that had to be frozen at a certain temperature, maybe at a certain warehouse, may be non-compliant, and then it gets refrigerated again on a truck and so forth and so forth. So by the time we get it, we're wondering like, why is it extra fishy? And maybe it's not as fresh as we thought it should be.
Actually, you nailed it. That's precisely what happens. And then in your example, it was shrimp, and we can take any fresh produced commodity. It can be strawberry or a tomato or onions, papayas, etc. They all need to be handled with care, not only during inside the warehouse as they are being loaded, unloaded, the temperature conditions of the trailer, the truck itself as it is pulled over, things like that. So yeah, all of those cold chain compliance items need to be adhered to and monitored.
So I want to talk about two mega trends. One is this whole COVID thing that we're just coming out of. And then now, of course, all the supply chain frictions that we're experiencing. Talk about the last, let's say, 2 to 3 years and to present, and how that has really exacerbated the problems that you're already talking about.
Absolutely. So I think we all know what happened in COVID, very unprecedented demand surge, right? People were shopping like crazy. There was like maybe almost 30% more demands than the previous years, pre-pandemic years. And on top of that, there was a reduced supply. The labor shortages in the warehouses, which delayed the picking and the packaging of things, etc., and the shortage of truck drivers in general, and especially truck drivers being very cognizant of which state they are going to. For example, certain states had stricter laws that you have to be, compliant for all the COVID protocols. So truck drivers would not very readily go to every place. Long story short, a lot of demand, reduced supply. That was a double whammy. And that's what happened. So the load to truck ratio reached to all-time high. There was load rejections happening. People were not able to move things on time. And as a result of that, there was delayed in transit times. And obviously the inventory was not available on time on the shelves from where the end consumers like you and I buy.
So let's talk about how the market reacted, and then specifically, what is Hwy Haul and how has that solved exactly this problem and market inefficiency that we're talking about?
Right. So I think one good thing that has happened during this pandemic time was sent a message loud and clear to every stakeholder involved in this end-to-end value chain. Hey, that adopt digital. Right? That is like table stakes now. The way this value chain has been run traditionally, pick up the phone and call 5 brokers to just find the right truck, who will call their carriers in their network, who will call their drivers in their network, all phone-based transactions. The way you track a truck, the way you record the temperature, it's all picking up the phone and calling the driver, hey, how are we doing? Where are you? What is your ETA? And things like that. So that message is now well received by the industry by and large. What is Hwy Haul? Yeah, well, Hwy Haul is the next generation digital freight platform for fresh produce. It is designed by produce experts, if you will. We have learned it the right way and the hard way by scaling it in companies like Walmart. And this platform connects the shippers directly with reliable carriers and truck drivers of refrigerated freight. In our case, the shippers are the farmers, growers, produce distributors, wholesalers, or even the retailers, right? So which means that, hey, you can find a truck in a blink of an eye, and you can track it with extreme transparency of who the driver is, where the driver is, what is the ETA, what are the temperature conditions, etc. All real time without having to make phone calls ideally.
Now, we've seen quite a bit of growth within the freight forwarding as well as just a general supply chain SaaS area. So even within the cold chain space that you're in, there are quite a bit of competitors, and certainly the big guys are also extending some of their new capabilities as well. So what makes Hwy Haul uniquely better positioned, perhaps, and what distinguishes and differentiates you guys?
Absolutely. So we differentiate ourselves not in one way, but several ways. It's pretty much a very unique combination of the following 3 or 4 things that actually differentiates us. Number one being that 100% of the Hwy Haul employees and our workforce talk and walk the produce language. So we are domain experts. We do not move electronics, apparel, construction, and all those kinds of freight. All we are doing, so we are positioning ourselves as a specialist, not as a generalist, that we will move anything that comes under the sun, which is what most of the big players are doing. And second thing is that our technology and the data capture that we are doing is more tailored towards produce. For example, if a traditional or a new age digital player will price a load from point A to point B, it'll be pretty much the market conditions are rate per mile, $3 per mile, let's say, and you have to travel 1,000 miles, $3,000 will be the price. No, in our case, the moment you add strawberries, totally different. Are you moving onions? Totally different price for the same mileage, etc. Right? And and the data lake that we are building is also the supply and demand and the weather and the temperature and humidity numbers of all these produce items that we can recommend several different insights to the shippers and make them look good.
So this is actually, I'm sorry, this is actually very interesting. I just want to pause real quick on the pricing model, because based on the massive data that you guys are developing or harnessing, is that you guys are coming with a price optimization on a produce basis or a product basis. Tell us a little bit about that. So let's take the example of, let's say, a frozen seafood versus a perishable fruit, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. So the thing is, ultimately, it boils down to the temperature condition, the humidity levels, the specializations of the trailer that needs to move sensitive commodities like the strawberries versus frozen versus some of the other items. So, and the fluctuations allowed cannot be more than maybe 1 degree or sometimes not more than 2 degrees. So even if you fat finger a temperature of strawberries at instead of 33 degrees, you mentioned 44, your whatever thousands or hundreds of maybe $100,000 load is going to get rejected and thrown to the dumpster. Right? Our engine, our pricing engine, and our recommendation engines in build catches that. These are the smart alerts that we have built into the system. Hey, looks like the strawberry load that is crossing Denver right now is running at 36 degrees. Let's jump on right now. What happened? Because we are deploying IoT-based temperature sensors in the loads if the shippers want that, and we are monitoring that live, not in an offline device, which is traditionally being used. That can give you a final read, but only as a pen drive, and you put it into a computer and it prints an EKG style printout, right? So yeah, all those things matter.
Now, I know there are other startups that are working on the ability not only for IoT sensors, but they can actually remotely control the thermostat, for instance. So if they see some variation where it's going beyond the tolerance of baseline or ceiling, for instance, they can automatically adjust the thermostat. In your case, how would you go about rectifying or resolving an issue en route?
Right. So here's what we are doing. We have built Scott facade layer technology-wise. That's an engineering architecture, which can plug in any kind of an IoT-based device as long as you are a cloud-based, API-based modern-day device. It can be, I don't want to name the companies because this call is being recorded. So, but we have partnership with several other IoT-based companies, and we are scraping data from those sensors. Now, to your point, and when this happens, we have to manually interject right now. We have to call the driver or we interact with him or her during the ecosystem that we have built, because all our drivers are using the mobile app and we send a push notification on the app, check the temperature. It is off by a degree, a couple of degrees. If we do not see a response, then we'll alert again, or we have a 24/7 human staff, produce savvy professionals who will jump on a call and talk to the driver right away to make sure the load gets accepted.
Now, you make another interesting point is that, I think when we think about these kind of SaaS platforms, that it's fully automated, you get these notifications and alerts, but there's a human factor, the fact that somebody has to be in some sort of call center reaching out to the drivers, and that interface needs to happen. And to your point, one of the core competency you guys have is this domain expertise. So tell us about why the human factor is so critical to the overall technology process.
But ultimately, it is a little high touch, right? You are moving some physical commodity, which is extremely precious and very important for it to arrive on time, and exceptions will happen. I mean, there's nobody who can make things work 100% of the times. And when those exceptions happen, it is ultimately, my belief is that we solve things by a combination of people, process, and technology, right? How much of automation, how much of semi-automation. So several things are fully automated in our ecosystem. Some of them are semi-automated. In this case, if a truck has broken down, then we have to interject human-wise. So what we tell our shippers, our customers, is that we are not only about AI, artificial intelligence, we are also about HI, human intelligence, because many times in these exceptional scenarios, when your freight is en route for the next 3 to 4 days, things will happen, and we got you covered in various ways we can.
I'm going to ask a kind of a different question entirely, which is using an adjacent analogy. In cybersecurity, we've started to see a growth of fintech organizations. So in other words, instead of just providing cybersecurity products or services, some startups are actually providing essentially insurance, saying that, hey, you pay the insurance to us and we'll make sure that you don't have security breach. In this case, is there an opportunity, aside from monitoring, coordination, and facilitation, and pricing engine, and so forth, and recommendation, is there an opportunity to create almost like an insurance product where you ensure that the product meets the compliance throughout the entire journey to the end destination?
It's in my investor deck already, this proposition. So I'm pleasantly surprised that you make that point. That's a good validation, you being an investor yourself. So yes, I'm happy to talk about it offline too, but absolutely. What do you think, Scott, we are going to do with the data that we are capturing? I mean, Highway Haul will be probably one of those few companies who can tell with confidence, with proven data, that, hey, strawberries moved in certain months of the year, in certain regions, at certain temperature and humidity levels, had a higher acceptance rate versus the rejection rate, etc. Right? So all of those things. So ultimately, we can give this guarantee to the shipper that, hey, if load gets rejected, it's on us. Because now we are fully confident that, hey, while the industry's average may be 6 to 8 to 10 to 14% of the loads getting rejected, ours is less than 1%, let's say, right? So yes, in the works, but not yet launched, FYI.
Well, and again, I think that really speaks to the value of the monetization of the data that you guys are building, both the raw data from the IoT sensors, but also the ability to harness it and gain insights and get a stronger confidence degree on some of these probabilistic outcomes, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Terrific. Now, Highway Haul has grown over 200% despite the challenge of supply chain and labor shortages. But I wonder, how is this possible given the fact that there is still that tight truck labor shortage? So is it just working with the finite set of truck drivers that are already available? What are you doing to make sure that there's growth, but also making sure that, navigating around some of the labor shortage issues?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the other way around. Not working with a finite set of, yes, of course, it's all finite set, but we have a large finite set of carriers on our side, which means that we, without giving you exact numbers, we believe that we have access to almost 10 to 12% of the market share of refrigerated truck drivers in the country, which means while a traditional broker, mom and pop, will be working with probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 trucking companies who they have a relationship with. We have tens of thousands of those, which means to the shipper, you will find reliable capacity with Highway Haul on a click of a button, 24/7, 365 days a year, because we do not work with the 7 and 10 only carriers. We work with the tens of thousands. So we will find a driver, a reliable driver for you round the clock. And that's the beauty of this platform that can scale and collapse with the demand.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, how do you symbiotically exist with these freight forward brokers to the extent that you just talked about, where you would have, been in that mom and pop operation? Do you work with them, or are you actually competing in disintermediating?
We are disintermediating the mom and pop brokers. In fact, if you zoom in a little bit, in our case, it's this whole $400 billion of full truckload for hire market consists of almost 17,000 freight brokers who move it. Now, 90% of that, they are mom and pops. You add all the big boys together, the C.S. Robinson, the J.B. Huns and Swift and Snyder and Echo and TQL, etc., all combined, the top 50 own only at max 10% market share. So the real fragmentation is on the mom and pop freight brokerage side, who may not have the advantage of the technology that companies like ours can do.
And I wonder how, and again, I'm a bit of kind of challenging the thought process a little bit, is sometimes, taking the Google advertising model, where instead of trying to cannibalize or try and destroy an existing legacy business, how do we incent these, legacy players to participate in the ecosystem and they get a pie of the share of the revenue?
So now you're slowly peeling the onions, Scott. This is a fantastic idea that we are actually brainstorming on as well. I don't want to overdial on that yet, but that is definitely an option on the table that we are debating upon as we speak. Because we do this ourselves, we have our own ecosystem that we have built. Why can't we just expose it to the rest of the world as well and make it a SaaS offering or something like that? Sure.
Amazing. Great. Super. Now, we already talked about the fact that the supply chain is already challenged, but now we're in this kind of this inflationary market. And especially when it comes to food, consumers are feeling the pinch of rising food prices. I wonder how that dynamic environment further challenges supply chain system and why, again, it points the direction to Hwy Haul.
That's what I keep saying that, hey, are we there yet? Of course not. I mean, the global supply chains are in a mess. I mean, yesterday it was COVID. Today it is Ukraine-Russia war. Tomorrow it will be something else, right? So what I believe is that this whole supply chain logistics ecosystem is passing through a Lehman Brothers moment that happened in fintech finance back in the days, right? What happened? And after that, world-class new age fintech companies evolved. That's what you will see, the rise of the digital players like Hwy Haul will be just one of them. Of course, there'll be so many different innovation which is happening and will be happening. One of the stats that I was reading in by some analyst reports, probably published by Goldman Sachs or Freight Waves, said that, hey, today overall brokerage is a $90 billion market, which is probably 5 to 7% of that is digitally done. Over the next probably 6 to 8 years, this will be $180 billion of brokerage market. And that will be 50% digital. So that is the upside that we are all going to witness, hopefully, and we are making big strides.
Well, it's very exciting. And again, in the context of climate change, this is so critical to digitize and to mitigate and reduce the food waste. Now, coming back to the broader climate change impact is that, I think this summer has been very severe from Europe to the Americas and really all over the world. And that has had a huge impact in agriculture, where many of the regions have been impacted by drought, shortage of even ground well water, and ultimately yield and quality of crop. And I wonder how that is not only putting strain on the system already, but also that's going to force a new set of movements. So, for example, maybe acceleration of, let's say, indoor vertical farming, for instance, or cell-based, lab meat and seafood, for instance.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And the world, the way it is changing, the climate is changing. We have to find ways to move the food closer to the consumer and keep it as fresh as possible. So we have to reduce the number of hops which have been taken, historically. The rise of vertical farming is happening as we speak, indoor farming. Right? I'm just reading there are certain companies, Plenty and etc. They are actually making big strides towards that. So strawberries can now be grown in winters, in December, in Boston or New York. Right? There are certain companies who are doing that. So that will be definitely one way to do things. The other change that we are witnessing is the buying habits of the consumers itself are changing. People are having healthier choices, more fresh and organic, and they cannot wait for 3 days and 10 days to arrive. So the farms will be moving closer to the consumer over the years through various ways they can. In terms of what a digital freight broker like Hwy Haul can do, everyone has to do their own bit to contribute to the ecosystem, to the climate change. What we are doing is in two big ways. A, as you said, we are reducing the food wastage. I think the load that have been moved through Hwy Haul, we have already seen up to 80% reduced rejections compared to if they were moved traditionally. Also, saving the empty miles that these truck drivers drive, which is a huge problem of the industry. 35% of the miles driven every year by these drivers are empty. Multiply it by the gallons of gas it wastes, right, diesel and all, you will have your number there. And we have, on that, we have significantly reduced the empty miles for the loads that we do. Our drivers do not go to pick up their next load 500 miles, right? It's pretty much we find them a nearby load.
All right, so what's next for Hwy Haul?
Technology, innovation. We want our brand to be synonymous to fresh, right? Oh, you are a Hwy Haul moved load. you got to be fresh, right? So that's where we are heading. The North Star that we are chasing as a company, the vision of the company is to literally eliminate food wastage during transportation, right? And I think we are making some big strides over there. The first grand step is to hyper digitize this value chain. If it consists of 33 different steps, every step is manual today. Let's automate the heck out of all of this value chain as much as we can.
Agreed. So with that, I've been joined by Syed Aman, founder and CEO of Hwy Haul. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Scott. Great talking to you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.